Mind telling me why you're in such a hurry tonight?
I just finished a late shift, officer. I'm heading home.
And what's in the bag?
Just my work laptop and some papers.
Keep your hands right there. You have the right to remain silent.
What did I do?
The siren chirped once, sharp and deliberate, like a finger snapping for tension. Marcus Reed slowed his steps but didn't stop. The sidewalk was nearly empty, the courthouse behind him lit in sterile white, the city humming with late-night indifference. He felt it before he heard it again, the weight of being watched, measured, misread. "Hey, you, turn around." Marcus did. The cruiser idled at the curb, engine low, predatory. The officer's window slid down. A pale face, hard eyes, a mouth already shaped for suspicion. "What are you doing out here?" the officer asked. Marcus kept his voice even. "Walking home." "At this hour?" "Yes." A pause. The officer looked him over, slow, invasive. Marcus felt the familiar calculation tighten in his chest, the cost of calm, the danger of defiance. "Hands where I can see them." A second cruiser pulled up. Red and blue light fractured the street, splashing across Marcus's coat, his face, the law books tucked under his arm. Someone across the street raised a phone, then lowered it. "I haven't done anything," Marcus said. The officer stepped out, boots striking pavement with confidence born of immunity. He leaned in close, voice low. "People like you always say that." The words cut clean, practiced, final. Metal cuffs snapped shut around Marcus's wrists. Cold, certain. As he was turned toward the car, Marcus's phone vibrated in his pocket. One incoming call, ignored, insistent. The screen lit up before the door slammed. Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division. The officer didn't see it. "Yet, sir, step away from a vehicle." Marcus Reed froze with his hand on the trunk latch. The streetlight buzzed overhead, throwing a sickly halo across the empty supermarket parking lot. He turned slowly, palms open, heart thudding once, twice. "I'm just loading groceries," Marcus said. "I live 2 blocks down." Officer Kyle Holland didn't answer. His boots crunched closer. "License. Now." Marcus reached for his wallet. "It's in my jacket pocket." "Do not reach," Holland snapped. "You people never listen." The words landed heavier than the night air. Marcus swallowed. "I'm listening." Another cruiser rolled in, lights washing red and blue over the asphalt. A woman pushed a cart past the lot entrance, glanced over, then looked away. Holland circled him. "What's in the bag?" "Food," Marcus said. "Rice, milk, chicken." "Open it." Marcus hesitated, then lifted the bag. Plastic rustled. The chicken slid into view. Holland smirked. "Funny. Dispatch says there's been theft around here." "Did someone report me?" Marcus asked. "Don't get smart." A hand shoved Marcus's shoulder. He stumbled, caught himself on the trunk. Pain flared. "Sir," Marcus said quietly, "you don't have cause." Holland laughed once. "You think you know the law." "I work in it," Marcus said. Silence. Then a sharp exhale. "Turn around." Cold metal bit into Marcus's wrists. The cuffs clicked, final and loud. His chest tightened, memory stacking. Other stops, other hands. The practice calm he'd learned to survive. A phone appeared, held by the second officer. "Sarge wants a name." "Marcus Reed," Marcus said. "Please, call your supervisor." Holland leaned close, breath sour with coffee. "Here's how this goes," he said. "You stay quiet, and maybe you go home tonight." The cruiser door opened. The night swallowed the sound as Marcus was guided forward, the grocery bag tearing, milk spilling across the pavement. The radio crackled. Holland's grip tightened. "You got priors?" he asked. "No," Marcus said. "You know that already." Answer when spoken to. The second officer shifted, uneasy. "Kyle, maybe we—" "Not your call." The cruiser smelled of vinyl and disinfectant. Marcus watched the ceiling lights slide by, each one a measured beat. He breathed through his nose, slow, controlled. "My attorney will ask why I was detained," Marcus said. And why my groceries on the ground? Harlan snorted. You threatening me? I'm stating facts. The car stopped. Doors opened. A station loomed, concrete and glass, windows dark. Inside, a desk sergeant glanced up. What's this? Suspicious activity, Harlan said. The sergeant looked at Marcus. Look back. On groceries. Refuse commands. Marcus met the sergeant's eyes. I complied. A pause. Paper shuffled. Put him in holding. The door clanged shut. The bench was cold. Marcus flexed his fingers, numb. He closed his eyes, counting, steadying the anger that wanted out. A phone buzzed somewhere. Harlan laughed again. Marcus opened his eyes. The camera's red light blinked. Marcus sank onto the narrow metal bench, the chill seeping through his jacket. The walls were gray, sterile, and humming faintly with the building's ventilation. The fluorescent light flickered above, exposing every line of fatigue on his face. He flexed his fingers, still stinging from the cuffs, and took a slow breath. Around him, the air smelled faintly of disinfectant and despair. The cell door clanged shut behind him. A small slot in the steel revealed Harlan's smirk for a moment before the officer moved away. Marcus sat upright, eyes scanning the room, noting the faint scuff marks on the floor and the graffiti near the corner. Words like snitch, rat, and slurs carved into the paint told their own story, a chronicle of countless people passed through here, judged and forgotten. A young officer opened the slot. Name, he asked, voice low, hesitant. He glanced around, uneasy. Marcus Reed. Marcus replied, head of the Civil Rights Division. The words hung in the air. The officer blinked once, then forced a neutral tone. Right. Sit tight. Marcus leaned back against the wall. He could hear muffled conversations outside the cell. Some officers joked quietly, others typed rapidly at keyboards. Every keystroke sounded like a countdown, a record being made, a narrative already written without him. His thoughts returned to Harlan, to the deliberate humiliation, the words designed to cut deep. People like you always say that. Those words were not just cruelty. They were doctrine, repetition, an idea ingrained in the system. Minutes passed. A cellmate shuffled in, a man with hooded eyes, muttering to himself, tracing lines in the dust on the floor. He nodded at Marcus but said nothing. Marcus offered no conversation. His mind was elsewhere, replaying the interaction, analyzing every gesture, every inflection. Harlan's laughter, the shove, the unnecessary questioning. It wasn't random. It was trained, habitual, systemic. Each movement a piece of a larger puzzle Marcus had fought against for decades. A soft knock on the metal door jarred him. Reed, a voice called. A fellow officer, mid-level, cautious, slid the small food tray through the slot. Marcus nodded without speaking. The officer hesitated, lips pressed together, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. I don't know why this happened, he said. Then he moved away. The words were meaningless comfort, but Marcus catalogued them anyway. Every hesitation, every half-hearted apology was evidence. He leaned his head back against the wall. Outside, the intercom crackled, the dispatcher announcing a call. Unit 321, possible theft at 8th and Main. Marcus's mind traced the irony, the accusation, the routine, the perfunctory calls. The system treated him like any other suspect, yet he was the very person overseeing civil rights enforcement. The hypocrisy weighed heavily, thick and suffocating. Hours passed. Marcus observed the routines of the cell block, the scrape of shoes, the rhythmic tapping on the bars, the quiet coughs of other detainees. Dialogue filtered in from corridors. One officer whispered to another, "You see that? He's in civil rights. Didn't you know?" The reply was a shrug, dismissive, and Marcus understood instantly. Knowledge did not equal protection. Awareness of power often increased danger. A newspaper rustled in the corridor. A voice read aloud, low, "Local man arrested for suspicious behavior downtown." The words were meaningless but symbolic. They had no context, no acknowledgement of the man inside the cell or the injustice that led him there. Marcus felt a sting of helplessness, not for himself, but for every invisible story erased under the guise of routine policing. He imagined the public narrative forming, simplified, sanitized, biased. By nightfall, the cell's light had dimmed to a pallid glow. Marcus shifted on the bench, knees drawn up, arms wrapped around them. Dialogue continued beyond the steel. A call to a supervisor, the low murmur of officers debating procedure, some arguing that Harlan had overstepped, others defending protocol. Marcus absorbed everything. He didn't respond. Observation was his weapon here. Patience, his shield. A fellow detainee, older, silent, leaned against the opposite wall. They exchanged nothing at first, only the occasional glance, a tacit acknowledgement that presence alone could be communication. Later, the man whispered, "They'll make excuses. Always do." Marcus nodded slightly, understanding the weight behind those words. The officer's power didn't need consent, just inertia. The system required no malevolence, only motion. His phone vibrated in his pocket, now confiscated, a reminder of the world outside that kept moving without him. Marcus imagined colleagues, family, emails stacking unanswered, the courthouse and newsroom continuing, unaware or unwilling to acknowledge the personal violation inflicted. He noted the quiet violence of bureaucracy, the endless catalogue of minor injustices that sustained systemic oppression. Later, a sergeant finally approached. "Reed, you're cleared for release pending review." His tone was clipped, professional, devoid of remorse. Marcus nodded, rising carefully, flexing his stiff wrists. The cuffs released with a satisfying click, leaving him with red marks that would linger like the memory of the encounter. Walking out of the cell, Marcus felt the weight of invisible observation. Every step through the corridor was a statement, a claim to presence, resilience, and visibility. Harlan waited at the exit, mask-like neutrality on his face. Their eyes met, but Marcus did not speak. Words would not serve here. As the door swung open, Marcus inhaled the night air, crisp and biting. Around him, the city continued indifferent to the injustice inflicted. In the distance, a faint siren sang its monotone song, a reminder that systemic patterns persisted beyond individual acts. He knew the battle was only beginning. The fluorescent lights in the station's administrative wing were harsh, slicing across the gray linoleum floors and sterile desks. Marcus sat rigid in the small interview room, wrists still tender, the imprint of the cuffs a vivid reminder. His idea had been run through the system multiple times, but no one had noticed, until now. A mid-level supervisor, Lieutenant Garcia, leaned over the desk, squinting at the screen. "Wait, Reed?" "Marcus Reed." His tone shifted from bureaucratic disinterest to stunned recognition. The pause hung heavy, the silence itself a kind of weight. "Yes," Marcus said, voice even, but each word carried the tension of accumulated indignities. "I'm the head of the Civil Rights Division." Garcia rubbed his temple, blinking rapidly. This can't be real." "How?" "Are you serious?" Marcus nodded. "I'm serious." Outside the room, the hum of the station continued. Dispatches, officers, phones ringing. But inside, time seemed suspended. Garcia stepped back, phone in hand, dialing cautiously. "We need the captain. Now." His eyes darted toward the door as if expecting Harlan to appear and complicate everything further. Moments later, Captain Reynolds entered, brisk and composed, though his brow furrowed as he registered Marcus's presence. "Lieutenant, explain." His voice was clipped, authoritative, carrying the weight of institutional responsibility. Garcia gestured at the screen, his finger hovering over the database entry. Reynolds' gaze shifted to Marcus. Recognition hit in a fraction of a second, registering both prestige and danger. You're Marcus Reed?" he asked, voice a notch higher, disbelief threading through his tone. "Yes, I was just walking home. That's all." The captain's eyes narrowed. "And Harlan?" He shook his head slightly, incredulous. This is serious. I need a report. Immediately. Call internal affairs." Garcia muttered. He didn't check the file first." Reynolds' lips pressed into a thin line. "Apparently not. Someone is going to answer for this lapse." Marcus leaned back, observing the flurry. Officers moved with careful caution around him, gestures clipped, tone measured. Their eyes avoided his, shifting nervously. Some whispered in low voices, names, rumors, murmurs of disbelief. How could this happen? The sentiment rippled through the station like a subtle tremor. The recognition of authority clashed with routine protocol. The system's inertia collided with accountability. Minutes stretched into tension-laden silence. A young internal affairs officer arrived, clipboard in hand, expression neutral but sharp. "Mr. Reed, we'll need a statement," she said. Marcus nodded. Words flowed as clearly as possible, a narrative distilled from the morning's humiliation. Every detail, every word from Harlan, every shove, every unnecessary order, meticulously recorded. Dialogue from the scene replayed in his mind. Harlan's laughter, the pointed phrase, "People like you always say that." Marcus transcribed the moment, not for vengeance, but as evidence of systemic prejudice and abuse of authority. Meanwhile, in the hallways, whispers reached him. Officers sharing fragments, some in disbelief, others calculating risk. Harlan had acted with confidence born from institutional protection. Now, that certainty faced exposure. Marcus felt the surge of irony, power wielded without conscience, now threatened by recognition and accountability. Reynolds' phone buzzed. He glanced down, then back to Marcus. "This is going to escalate," he said quietly, almost to himself. "We need to contain the situation, prevent leaks." His eyes flicked to the door, then back. "And Harlan, he will be questioned. Today." Marcus studied the captain's expression. Calculated concern, not moral outrage. Bureaucracy moved differently than justice. The gears of accountability were slow, deliberate, cautious. Yet, Marcus recognized an opening. A misstep, a failure, an oversight, a single spark in a system powered by inertia. He would track it, document it, ensure it could not be buried under routine again. Outside the office, the station seemed oblivious. Dispatchers continued their work. Officers patrolled hallways. Phones rang. Yet, the balance had shifted. Harlan, confident a few hours ago, now faced scrutiny he had not anticipated. The files, the ID, the recognition of authority, it all converged in the sterile room. Marcus exhaled slowly, tension easing slightly, but not entirely. He had survived the immediate confrontation, but the repercussions were only beginning. Each dialogue, each recorded interaction, each careful observation of Harlan's behavior would serve as ammunition, not for revenge, but for truth. Garcia returned to the room briefly. "We're going to handle this," he said. "I'll make sure the report reaches the right hands." His eyes betrayed unease, acknowledgement of the weight of the situation. Marcus nodded, silent, absorbing each word, each gesture, each flicker of institutional acknowledgement. The phone buzzed again. Messages, emails, notifications, signals from the world outside the station. Marcus realized he was no longer just a detainee. He was now an intersection of authority, prejudice, and accountability. Every movement, every word, now carried weight. Observation was no longer passive. It had become strategy. As the internal affairs officer took Marcus's statement, Harlan remained absent, unaccounted for. The silence of the station around them carried tension, the anticipation of confrontation, exposure, reckoning. Marcus leaned forward slightly, eyes steady, heart measured. The story of this morning's injustice was no longer confined to the street. It had entered the files, the system, and now into the possibility of consequence. And in that precise, suspended moment, Marcus understood. The real battle was about to begin. By mid-afternoon, the news cycle had begun its slow churn. Marcus sat at his dining room table, the cuff's redness on his wrists fading but the memory vivid. His laptop glowed, emails piling in, messages from colleagues, reporters, friends. Each ping carried both concern and the subtle weight of disbelief. The bodycam footage had been leaked. Harlan's smug smile, the shove, the orders, the words. "People like you always say that." Marcus watched, controlled, as the scene unfolded again. Public eyes would now see what he had endured, and the narrative was shifting. The quiet indifference of bureaucracy could no longer contain it. "Marcus, I saw it," said Layla, his assistant, pacing behind him. Her voice trembled, though she tried to steady it. "It's everywhere. News clips, social media. People are outraged." He nodded. It's out. That's a start. But the system will push back. Push back? She asked, frowning. They can't just let him. They will. Marcus interrupted. This is how it works. Power is patient. It doesn't apologize. It negotiates, delays, obfuscates. That's why documentation is everything. Outside, sirens flashed past, ordinary yet jarring after the morning's chaos. Marcus felt the pulse of the city through the walls, the rhythm of routines oblivious to the injustice that had just occurred. His phone buzzed incessantly. Every call, every text was a thread in the web of exposure now forming. The phone rang again, this time a familiar number. His colleague, Deputy Director Simmons, spoke quickly, low. Marcus, do you realize who Harlan really is? He has connections higher than we thought. This isn't just a local station problem. Marcus clenched his jaw. I know. That's why every detail matters. We can't leave anything to chance. He set up a temporary command center. Laptop, tablet, papers, screenshots, timestamps. Every second of body cam footage, every dialogue snippet, every witness statement carefully logged. The sense of exposure was double-edged, relief mingled with dread. Harlan's arrogance had underestimated the reach of visibility, but now Marcus had to ensure it translated into accountability. By evening, the first reporters appeared at his residence. Cameras, microphones, the glare of public scrutiny. Marcus spoke carefully, measured. I was stopped and detained without cause, he said. The officer's actions reflect a broader problem in policing. My role is to ensure this is documented and addressed. Questions came rapid fire. Motives, prior incidents, departmental response. Marcus answered each, careful to balance transparency and strategy. Every word was a safeguard, a record, a statement of principle. The dialogue itself became a weapon against obfuscation. Layla leaned close. You okay? She asked. I will be, he said, though the tension under his ribs remained. But this isn't over. Harlan will respond. The department will respond. Some will defend him. Some will attack the narrative. That's why clarity matters. Hours later, Marcus watched as the footage circulated online. Public outrage surged. Discussions erupted in forums, commentary from civil rights advocates, social media threads dissecting the sequence, tone, and implication of Harlan's words and actions. Each dialogue, each post, each public reaction reinforced the gravity of systemic patterns. His phone buzzed again, a message from an unknown number. A photo, blurred but unmistakable. Harlan, standing outside the station, eyes sharp, lips pressed. No words, just a silent warning. Marcus read it, considered it, and did not respond. Every threat, every intimidation tactic was catalogued, every action anticipated. The night deepened. Marcus leaned back, exhaustion pressing, yet clarity sharpened. Public exposure had forced Harlan into a corner. Every lie, every act of denial, every attempt to manipulate the narrative would now face scrutiny. The balance of power had shifted, even if temporarily. And yet, in that quiet, Marcus understood the stakes fully. The exposure was only a beginning. Emotional cost, public scrutiny, and institutional inertia would test him, but it had to be done. Justice was procedural, incremental, methodical, not instantaneous. The system could now see what had been hidden, and Marcus would ensure it could not be unseen. He closed the laptop, rubbed his wrists, and looked out the window. The city continued, indifferent, unaware. But beneath the lights and sirens, change had begun, slow, deliberate, irreversible. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the Civil Rights Division office, the chill of winter cutting through his coat. The lobby buzzed with low conversation, colleagues exchanging cautious glances, phones buzzing, keyboards clattering. The department's reaction was already in motion, bureaucratic and meticulous. Lieutenant Garcia met him near the elevator. They've issued a statement, he said, handing Marcus a printed copy. The words were carefully neutral, full of procedural phrasing. All allegations are under review. The department takes misconduct seriously and will cooperate fully with internal investigations. Marcus read it once, then again. Nothing about Harlan's behavior, nothing acknowledging the racial element, nothing personal. just language engineered to absorb attention without admitting fault. He exhaled slowly. They are trying to control the narrative, Marcus said. Silence a strategy. Garcia nodded. Internal Affairs is opening a formal investigation. But you know how slow this moves. Marcus leaned against the edge of the desk. I know. That's why I'm documenting everything. Timeline, witnesses, the footage, statements. If they think a press release can replace accountability, they're mistaken. The first meeting with Internal Affairs was formal. Marcus presented his statement, walked them through bodycam evidence, and identified procedural violations. Every dialogue exchange, every action Harlan had taken was catalogued meticulously. Officer Harlan did not verify identity before detention, Marcus said. He misused authority to escalate an encounter based on racial profiling. That's systemic, not accidental. Internal Affairs Officer Sanders nodded, taking notes. Understood. Sir, your report is detailed. This will be forwarded to the review board. There may be hearings and interviews. Expect delays. Marcus remained silent. Delays were predictable. Bureaucracy often diluted urgency. He understood this, yet he refused to let inaction or inertia silence the issue. Every pause, every procedural obstacle was a reflection of systemic reflex, the institution protecting itself before principles. Outside the meeting, whispers circulated. Officers speculated. Some minimized the incident, his exaggerating. Others feared the implications. This could reach media if mishandled. Marcus observed, recording, noting patterns. He understood the subtle coding in language, the way bias concealed itself in innocuous phrasing. Exaggeration masked disbelief, handling carefully masked protection of the officer. By afternoon, emails from the department multiplied. Requests for clarification, calls to witnesses, coordination with legal advisors. Marcus responded methodically, his tone professional, precise, unemotional. Every exchange became evidence, a record to counter any attempt at denial. A colleague approached cautiously. Marcus, people are talking. Some officers are uncomfortable with this. Others are defending him. I expected that, Marcus replied. Institutional reflex. Defense, denial, minimization. It's how systems perpetuate themselves. He returned to his office, drafting memos and coordinating with a media liaison. Dialogue now was a weapon. Careful words, public statements, responses to reporters. Each sentence balanced exposure with authority, clarity with restraint. Later, an internal hearing was scheduled. Marcus prepared for cross-examination, anticipating both denials and coded language. He rehearsed precise recounting of dialogue, physical actions, and context. Harlan's every move will be documented, every word cross-referenced. In the corridor, another officer passed, whispering, "You're really going to take him down?" Marcus ignored the tone, noting the phrase. Curiosity and fear mixed in quiet observation. That mixture revealed the subtle pressure mechanisms operating inside the department, the social control embedded in routine behavior. By evening, Marcus leaned back in his chair, exhausted but alert. The exposure, the statements, the media, the internal communications, they all intersected in a pattern that revealed both the fragility and resilience of institutional systems. Justice required persistence, meticulous documentation, and strategic engagement. The reflexive silence of bureaucracy could not withstand transparency when systematically challenged. He glanced at the leaked footage again. Harlan's face, once confident, now became a record of hubris and oversight. Dialogue from the encounter played in his mind. Every phrase, every inflection, every microaggression now served as evidence, as testament, as moral leverage against systemic power. Marcus exhaled, sensing both anticipation and fatigue. The system had moved, reflexively, but the inertia was only partially broken. Internal affairs, media scrutiny, public opinion. There were mechanisms, not solutions. The fight for accountability required ongoing vigilance, strategic pressure, and unwavering focus. That night, as he left the office, the city glimmered with indifferent lights. The battle had shifted from the street to the corridors of bureaucracy. The institutional reflex had responded, cautiously, but change demanded persistence. Marcus walked home, each step measured, aware of the stakes, and prepared for the confrontation that awaited. The days after the internal review became a battleground of subtle threats and calculated intimidation. Marcus felt at the moment he stepped into the office, whispers trailing behind him, hesitant glances from colleagues, an abrupt end to casual conversations. Dialogue had shifted. Every exchange carried an undercurrent of caution or veiled judgment. Layla intercepted him in the hallway. "Marcus, someone left this on your desk." She handed him a plain envelope. Inside were photographs of his car parked outside his home, notes scribbled in shorthand. "Be careful. Don't push too far." Marcus exhaled slowly, folding the paper neatly. Threats were nothing new, but this was different, deliberate, targeted, personal. "Thanks, Layla. Keep this documented," he said, voice steady. Every action, every word, became data in his mind, material for accountability, not reaction. Back in his office, Marcus reviewed emails and messages. Anonymous warnings, vague accusations questioning his conduct, even subtle edits in official memos attempting to undermine his credibility. Dialogue in meetings became clipped. Officers used coded language to signal alignment with Harlan without committing overtly. Marcus recognized the pattern: ostracization, subtle harassment, social isolation, a familiar framework of retaliation against truth-tellers. He met with Deputy Director Simmons. "They are trying to destabilize you," Simmons said quietly, gesturing toward the closed office doors. "This is procedural, psychological, and social. Don't underestimate the pressure." Marcus nodded. "I won't. But documentation is the strongest shield here. Every action, every word, every attempt at intimidation becomes evidence." Later that day, a phone call from an unknown number interrupted his workflow. A voice, distorted, warned him to drop it and think of the consequences. Marcus remained calm, logging the call. Each threat, each veiled warning, became another thread in the network of systemic pressure. Dialogue, both direct and indirect, revealed the underlying mechanisms of institutional and social control. During meetings, Harlan remained defiant. Though absent from direct interaction, his reputation loomed. Colleagues referenced him cautiously. "We need to be careful with Harlan's case," or "He's influential, don't provoke further." Marcus observed their language, noting the shift from standard procedural dialogue to coded caution. Every phrase, every choice of words reflected the lingering power of bias, even in the face of exposure. Public pressure added another layer. News outlets published updates daily. Editorials debated systemic bias, bodycam evidence, and the police department's slow response. Marcus engaged with reporters selectively, carefully shaping the narrative without inflaming tensions. Dialogue in interviews was deliberate. Truth conveyed precisely, without exaggeration, a balance between public accountability and strategic restraint. One evening, as he walked to his car, he noticed a group of officers gathered across the street. They looked at him, then turned away, whispering among themselves. Marcus felt the familiar weight of observation, the tension of silent judgment. Each glance, each whisper, each unspoken assumption became part of the pressure matrix he now navigated daily. He returned home, reviewing internal reports, bodycam footage, and statements again. The process was relentless. Each encounter, each conversation, each email became a puzzle piece in building irrefutable evidence. Dialogue, whether verbal or written, revealed the systemic nature of bias and retaliation, and Marcus catalogued everything with methodical precision. Later that night, he reflected on the emotional cost. The isolation, the subtle attacks, the constant scrutiny. It was draining. Yet Marcus recognized the truth. Resistance carried weight. Standing firm, documenting meticulously, and navigating the pressure with precision turned vulnerability into leverage. Dialogue became his weapon, observation his armor. The next morning, internal memos circulated faster than before, reflecting both anxiety and defensive maneuvering. Officers used indirect language to signal compliance or dissociation from Harlan. Marcus anticipated each shift, each coded phrase, and planned responses that would maintain transparency while avoiding unnecessary escalation. By evening, he paused at the window, watching the city glow under streetlights. The harassment, the subtle threats, the bureaucratic games. They were all extensions of the system he fought against. Marcus understood the stakes: emotional endurance, strategic vigilance, and unwavering commitment to principle. He would withstand the pressure, meet every challenge with evidence and clarity, and ensure that accountability was inevitable. The battle was no longer just about Harlan. It was about exposing the mechanisms of power, bias, and retaliation that allowed injustice to persist. And Marcus, resilient and deliberate, was ready to confront them all. The hearing room smelled of polished wood and sterile air. Marcus entered, flanked by his legal counsel, and felt the weight of anticipation in the chamber. Rows of chairs were filled with department officials, media representatives, and a scattering of public observers. At the front, a panel of internal reviewers sat, their expressions neutral, though Marcus detected faint traces of tension. Harlan arrived late, his uniform crisp, posture rigid. His gaze swept the room, briefly locking with Marcus's. Confidence lingered in his posture, though now tinged with caution. Dialogue began with formalities. The hearing officer spoke first, outlining procedures, rights, and responsibilities. Every word carried weight. Every pause a calculated measure of authority. "Mr. Reed," the officer addressed him, "please present your statement regarding the incident on Main Street." Marcus rose, calm, steady. "On the morning in question, I was walking home when I was stopped and detained by Officer Kyle Harlan without just cause. The encounter involved verbal harassment, a physical shove, and racially biased comments, which I have documented and submitted, along with body cam footage." The room absorbed the statement in silence. Harlan shifted in his seat, clearing his throat. "I was responding to a call of suspicious behavior," he said. His voice tried to assert authority, but cracks of unease were audible. "Suspicious based on what?" Marcus asked, tone firm, unflinching. "Can you identify any behavior beyond my presence and appearance that justified detention?" Harlan hesitated. Protocol does not permit targeting individuals based on race," Marcus interrupted. The dialogue resonated through the room, a public assertion of principle. Murmurs rippled among observers, some nodding, some whispering. Witnesses were called. Dispatch operators recounted the call, confirming it lacked specificity. Fellow officers testified, carefully, some in support of procedure, others revealing Harlan's disregard for verification and escalation protocols. Every exchange of dialogue exposed inconsistencies, omissions, and procedural violations. Marcus listened, cataloging details, noting how casual assumptions and coded language have facilitated the abuse. The panel questioned Harlan directly. "Did you verify Mr. Reed's identification before detaining him?" "No, not immediately," Harlan admitted. "I acted on suspicion." "And that suspicion was based on?" Silence. The room waited. "Finally," Harlan muttered, "appearance, behavior, context." Marcus's gaze was unwavering. "Context cannot substitute for law. And your perception was biased by race. That is not subjective. It's documented in your actions, your words, your body cam footage." The tension thickened. Every word, every pause, every exchanged glance in the room was charged. Dialogue became the instrument of accountability, exposing systemic failures and individual responsibility. Observers leaned forward, noting the contrast between Harlan's faltering narrative and Marcus's precise, measured testimony. Cross-examination revealed more. Harlan's prior incidents of similar behavior, casual dismissals of complaints, and patterns of intimidation. Dialogue here was meticulous, each question and answer building an irrefutable record. Internal affairs probed procedural adherence, while Marcus clarified the racial dynamics that had informed Harlan's judgment and actions. A colleague of Marcus's testified remotely, providing context about his role in the Civil Rights Division, the policies he championed, and the significance of the encounter. "Mr. Reed's position is not just administrative," the witness said. "It embodies oversight, accountability, and protection of citizens' rights. The officer's actions reflect systemic bias, not isolated error." By mid-afternoon, the panel requested closing statements. Marcus stood again, voice clear, unwavering. "This hearing is not about me personally. It is about accountability, transparency, and the integrity of law enforcement. Bias cannot be tolerated, regardless of rank, authority, or routine. Today, we document not just an incident, but a pattern that must be addressed. Harlan's final statement was defensive, measured, but the cracks were visible. He tried to assert authority, deny malintent, and minimize his actions, but the juxtaposition with documented dialogue and evidence made it ineffective. The systematic exposure of bias, procedural neglect, and abuse of power overshadowed his narrative. The panel adjourned to deliberate. Marcus remained seated, hands folded, observing the room. Media murmurs, officer reactions, and whispered speculations filled the air. Dialogue among officials outside the hearing revealed anxiety, uncertainty, and acknowledgement of the institutional implications. Marcus cataloged these subtleties. Every whisper, every expression, every indirect admission became part of the record. When the hearing reconvened, the panel read its preliminary findings. Harlan's actions constituted abuse of authority, racial bias, and procedural violations. Sanctions, termination, and further investigation were recommended. Dialogue shifted in the room, from defense to compliance, from arrogance to acknowledgement. Marcus remained composed, absorbing the procedural justice without personal triumph. The work was not over, but a significant milestone had been reached. As the room emptied, Marcus stepped outside, the evening sky painted in shades of gray and gold. The city's pulse continued, indifferent yet witness to the exposure of power and injustice. Dialogue, documentation, and deliberate action had carved accountability into a system designed to resist it. Marcus exhaled. The battle had reached a turning point. Justice, slow and procedural, was asserting itself, but the emotional cost, the tension, the threats, the enduring awareness of systemic bias would remain. He walked into the night, resolute, aware that the struggle for equity demanded vigilance beyond any single victory. The morning air was crisp as Marcus entered the courthouse, the weight of anticipation pressing on his shoulders. The hallway buzzed with quiet activity, reporters setting up cameras, lawyers murmuring, officers shuffling papers. Each movement, each snippet of dialogue, carried the tension of accountability. Inside the chamber, the panel reconvened. Harlan sat rigid, posture defensive, eyes darting occasionally toward Marcus. His legal counsel whispered last-minute instructions, attempting to steady a man whose confidence had begun to falter under scrutiny. Marcus's own counsel remained calm, guiding him through procedural formalities. The presiding official spoke first. "We have reviewed all evidence, witness testimony, body cam footage, and statements from all parties. The panel's findings are clear." Harlan shifted uneasily, fingers drumming on the table. The officer in question, the official continued, violated protocol, engaged in racially biased behavior, and misused authority in detaining Mr. Marcus Reed. These actions are inconsistent with the standards of this department and law enforcement ethics. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. Some officers exchanged wary glances. Media scribes leaned forward, capturing every word. Harlan's lawyer attempted a rapid objection, but it was overruled. The evidence was overwhelming, the dialogue recorded, the body cam indisputable. Marcus observed silently. Each word of the verdict was validation of the meticulous documentation, the strategic use of dialogue and observation, and the persistent pressure applied in the aftermath of the stop. He had anticipated the procedural rigor, but the clarity of judgment still carried weight. The presiding officer continued. Officer Harlan is hereby terminated from service, and a recommendation for further legal review is submitted to the district attorney's office. Additionally, the department will enter a federal consent decree to ensure accountability measures are enforced and prevent similar abuses in the future. Harlan's face paled. Dialogue between him and his counsel was now hushed, urgent, defensive. The veneer of authority cracked, revealing vulnerability beneath years of institutional protection. The weight of exposure, coupled with documented evidence, had dismantled the shield he had relied upon. Outside, reporters gathered, cameras flashing, microphones poised. Marcus stepped forward for a brief statement. Today's outcome affirms that bias and abuse of authority are not beyond scrutiny. Accountability is essential, even when it challenges entrenched power structures. This verdict is not just personal. It is procedural, systemic, and necessary for the integrity of law enforcement. Questions came rapid fire: the role of public exposure, the impact on departmental policy, the future of oversight. Marcus answered with precision, each phrase measured to convey truth without inflaming rhetoric. Dialogue here became a continuation of the process: clarity, transparency, and persistence shaping the narrative beyond the courtroom. Back inside, the department began implementing reforms outlined in the consent decree. Training modules emphasizing racial equity and procedural adherence were scheduled. Officers received guidance on handling complaints, verifying information, and mitigating bias. Marcus observed the procedural steps, aware that systemic change was incremental, deliberate, and resistant, yet necessary. Harlan was escorted from the courthouse, subdued, muttering to his counsel, the reality of consequences sinking in. Dialogue among observers and officials revealed relief, cautious optimism, and recognition of the broader implications. The emotional and institutional cost of bias was now visible, undeniable, and formally addressed. Later, Marcus returned to the Civil Rights Division. Colleagues approached with restrained congratulations, sharing insight from public reactions and internal assessments. Dialogue flowed, careful, reflective, acknowledging both the victory and the ongoing welcome. Marcus listened, cataloging information, planning next steps, ensuring that the procedural momentum would continue. As the evening settled, Marcus reflected on the journey. The stop, the detention, the threats, the bureaucratic inertia, all had culminated in formal accountability. Yet the emotional toll, the strain of persistent vigilance, and the knowledge of systemic resistance remained. Justice had been achieved, but at the cost of personal endurance and persistent engagement. He stepped to the window, looking over the city lights. The pulse of the city continued, indifferent yet now witness to a measured change. Dialogue, evidence, and strategic action had carved accountability into a resistant system. Marcus exhaled slowly, aware that the battle for systemic fairness extended beyond a single verdict. Tonight, however, there was resolution. Procedural justice had spoken. The abuser faced consequences. The system was compelled to reform, and the principles Marcus had fought for gained affirmation. Still, the vigilance required by truth-tellers remained, a quiet reminder that exposure and accountability are never final. They are continuous, demanding, and essential. The weeks following the verdict carried a strange, heavy quiet. Marcus returned to the Civil Rights Division office, the routine familiar yet transformed. Colleagues greeted him with measured warmth, a mix of relief and lingering tension. The battle had ended, but the echoes of confrontation remained. Emails from external agencies, community groups, and advocacy organizations poured in, requesting updates, clarifications, and commentary. Marcus responded carefully, ensuring accuracy while emphasizing the systemic implications of the incident. Dialogue was deliberate. Each word was a reinforcement of accountability, a bridge between public awareness and institutional reform. The department implemented the mandated reforms from the federal consent decree. Training modules on racial bias, procedural adherence, and citizen rights were scheduled. Internal audits increased. Officers were reminded that oversight was active, persistent, and non-negotiable. Yet Marcus observed subtle resistance, body language, guarded speech, indirect remarks. Systemic inertia never vanished completely. It adapted. He met with Harlan's former colleagues. Some expressed remorse. Others remained defensive, offering carefully chosen words to distance themselves from the incident. "I never knew it was that bad," one said quietly. Marcus listened, noting the selective acknowledgement of responsibility. Dialogue revealed both the human capacity for reflection and the persistence of denial, a duality in the culture of power. Outside the office, the city continued, indifferent yet subtly altered. Reports surfaced analyzing the case. Discussions unfolded on news panels, and community forums debated institutional accountability. Marcus attended a few sessions, providing testimony and insights. His presence, calm but authoritative, reminded others that vigilance and transparency were active responsibilities, not abstract ideals. Emotionally, Marcus felt the strain. Even after Harlan's termination and the procedural justice rendered, a residual tension lingered. Hyper-awareness, the stress of confrontation, and the weight of observation had left traces. Yet he also recognized resilience, a deeper understanding of endurance, strategic thinking, and moral courage under pressure. Dialogue within the office, with the public, and even internally with himself became tools for processing, teaching, and reinforcing principles. Late one evening, Marcus walked through the quiet streets near his home. The lamps glowed against the cold night, reflections of a city's continuity. He recalled Harlan's words, the casual cruelty, the microaggressions, and the deliberate misuse of authority. Each phrase had been catalogued, counted, exposed. The psychological residue lingered, but so did the proof of accountability, the procedural victory, and the affirmation that vigilance and documentation mattered. Back in his apartment, he reviewed the footage one last time. Dialogue, actions, timing, every detail reaffirmed the necessity of persistence. Each sentence, each interaction had contributed to dismantling the shield Harlan relied upon. Marcus understood that justice was not only about punishment but about exposing systemic patterns, educating others, and preventing recurrence. Layla stopped by late, carrying documents and reports. "The community is responding well," she said. "Your work, it's making a difference." Marcus nodded. Difference takes time. Visibility, consistency, and accountability are the instruments of change. Justice is procedural, not instant. We've made a step forward, but the work continues. They spoke in quiet dialogue, planning ongoing outreach, monitoring, and documentation. Each conversation reinforced a framework Marcus had built, evidence-based, strategic, principled. Emotional cost was acknowledged, yet focus remained on sustained action. As the night deepened, Marcus gazed out the window. The city's pulse continued, indifferent yet witness to the ripple effects of exposure. The officer who had once wielded power with impunity was gone from the system. Procedures had been tightened, the narrative had been corrected, yet the vigilance, the awareness, and the commitment to justice remained essential. He exhaled, tension easing but not disappearing. Resilience had been forged through confrontation, careful observation, and precise dialogue. Justice had been achieved, imperfect yet meaningful. The cost had been emotional, procedural, and social, but the outcome reinforced the principles Marcus upheld: equity, accountability, and strategic action against systemic abuse. The city slept around him. In that quiet, Marcus reflected on the journey, from humiliation through exposure and confrontation to procedural justice. The battle had changed him, reinforced his vigilance, and underscored the necessity of deliberate, principled action. Dialogue, documentation, and methodical persistence had carved accountability into a resistant system. The struggle for equity was ongoing, but this chapter had ended with consequence, awareness, and a foundation for continued vigilance. Marcus walked through the Civil Rights Division offices a morning after the final hearings, the hum of activity muted compared to the chaos of the past weeks. Colleagues offered cautious nods. Some averted their eyes, others lingered with a subtle respect born of witnessing endurance under fire. The victories of accountability had been owned, procedural and public, but the emotional residue lingered. The department had moved. Harlan was terminated and facing charges for misconduct and abuse of authority. A federal consent decree mandated systemic reforms, body cam protocols, bias training, and procedural checks that would have been inconceivable before. Marcus reviewed the official documents with meticulous attention. Every phrase, every clause reflected institutional acknowledgement, but it also revealed compromise. Justice was partial, pragmatic, imperfect. In his office, Marcus's assistant, Layla, placed a stack of emails on his desk. Messages from colleagues, community leaders, and advocates expressed support and validation. But amidst the congratulations, there were also reminders of human cost. Friends had been drawn into the conflict, allies faced quiet retaliation, and every detail of his personal life had been scrutinized. Dialogue, both internal and external, had shaped the narrative, and each word carried weight. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing the faint redness on his wrists, a reminder of the arbitrary encounter that had sparked systemic exposure. Reflection mingled with fatigue. The exposure, the documentation, the relentless pressure, all had exacted emotional toll. Marcus understood fully that survival had not meant immunity. Vigilance remained essential. Every bureaucratic victory was intertwined with the ongoing reality of systemic inertia. A phone call broke the quiet. Deputy Director Simmons's measured voice came through. Marcus, public opinion is solidly behind you. The investigation concluded favorably, but the system will resist further change unless continued pressure is applied. I know, Marcus replied, voice low but resolute. The work continues. The precedent is set, but implementation is what matters now. He ended the call and stared at the city outside his office window. The streets were alive with motion, indifferent yet fragile in their own way. Justice had been served in measured doses. Harlan's authority dismantled publicly, but Marcus's understanding of the system remained unromantic. Institutional reform was slow. Systemic patterns persisted beneath surface compliance. Dialogue, observation, and relentless accountability were the tools necessary for continued progress. Later, in a meeting with his legal and administrative team, Marcus reviewed upcoming strategies for monitoring reform compliance. Transparency must be constant, he said, eyes scanning the room. Every body cam log, every procedural deviation, document, analyze, respond. Inertia thrives on silence. Conversations continued late into the afternoon. Dialogue dissected every nuance of officer behavior, every systemic vulnerability, and every opportunity for meaningful oversight. Marcus recognized that exposure alone did not equal transformation. Behavioral change required sustained attention, enforcement, and strategic intervention. That evening, he returned home, alone for the first time in weeks. Silence was heavy but not oppressive. He prepared a brief for the next day, reviewing the timeline, key dialogue, and documented evidence. Each piece was a testament to resilience, to the capacity for systems to be challenged, but also to the personal cost of engagement. He paused, considering the arc of the past events. The arrest, the humiliation, the media scrutiny, the institutional response, all had culminated in procedural justice. Yet, trauma lingered, subtle and persistent. He flexed his fingers, recalling the weight of metal cuffs and the sting of casual cruelty. These memories, etched into his body and mind, would serve as a reminder. Vigilance, accountability, and moral courage are ongoing demands. Finally, Marcus leaned back, breathing deeply. Justice had been achieved in a public and professional sense. Systemic exposure had forced accountability. But resilience, personal endurance, and strategic action remained essential. The city continued unaware, indifferent yet interconnected, and Marcus knew that the work, like the dialogue and observation that had sustained him, would never truly end. He closed his laptop, lights dimmed across the office, and for a fleeting moment allowed himself stillness. The battle had shifted from confrontation to vigilance, from exposure to monitoring, from immediate danger to long-term responsibility. He remained alert, prepared, and steadfast, aware that accountability is not a destination but a process, and that each word, each action, and each observation carried the weight of change. Marcus sat at his desk, the city's glow spilling through the office window. Weeks had passed since Harlan's termination, yet the echoes of the arrest lingered, conversations replayed in his mind, gestures and expressions examined over and over. The procedural victory had been achieved, but personal reflection revealed subtler truths. The fragility of institutional accountability, the emotional toll of exposure, and the pervasive nature of systemic bias. He reviewed files, statements, and footage, noting patterns that had emerged over the weeks. Dialogue between officers, emails to supervisors, and internal memos formed a tapestry of both resistance and compliance. Every word, even seemingly innocuous, carried embedded meaning. Resistance masked as protocol, loyalty hidden in silence, threats cloaked in formality. Marcus understood that the system functioned through subtleties, and survival required both vigilance and comprehension. Layla entered quietly, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "You're still at it," she remarked. Her tone was gentle but edged with concern. Marcus accepted the mug, nodding. Reflection is part of accountability. I need to see the system clearly, not just the individual. Dialogue with colleagues continued throughout the day. They shared insights, frustrations, and concerns, often couched in careful language. Marcus guided these conversations, emphasizing observation and documentation. Every interaction tells a story, he reminded them. Every conversation, every hesitation, every misstep, it's data. Analysis leads to change. He paused to consider the personal cost. Relationships had been tested, emotional reserves stretched, and trust both earned and scrutinized. The ordeal had exposed him to subtle threats, public scrutiny, and bureaucratic resistance. Yet, the process had also illuminated resilience, his own and that of the colleagues and community members who supported accountability. Dialogue, both internal and external, had been central to understanding and navigating these dynamics. Marcus drafted a report summarizing systemic weaknesses revealed by the incident. He emphasized structural vulnerabilities, procedural lapses, and the potential for bias to manifest in seemingly neutral processes. The report was meticulous, every detail verified, every observation annotated. He knew exposure alone did not reform a system. Deliberate, sustained action was required. Dialogue and transparency remained his primary tools. Evening descended, casting long shadows across the office. Marcus leaned back, reviewing the timeline of events from the initial arrest of public exposure, internal hearings, and institutional reforms. Each phase revealed lessons. Vigilance mattered, documentation mattered, and moral courage, though costly, yielded tangible change. He reflected on Harlan's downfall. It had been swift in procedural terms but slow in personal reckoning. Dialogue, evidence, and public scrutiny had dismantled the officer's authority. Yet Marcus recognized a limitation. Systemic change required more than accountability for a single individual. It required persistent oversight, cultural shift, and structural reform. A phone buzzed, Layla texting updates on ongoing compliance checks. Marcus responded briefly, aware that even now, subtle patterns of resistance persisted. Observation remained critical. Dialogue continued, sometimes overt, sometimes coded, as officers navigated the balance between protocol and morality. Marcus understood this complexity intimately. Finally, he allowed a moment of stillness, closing his laptop. Reflection was not passive, it was active, demanding, and essential. He had witnessed systemic abuse, confronted it, and navigated retaliation. The process had exacted a cost but also demonstrated the power of principled action. Dialogue, observation, and meticulous documentation had been both shield and weapon. Marcus exhaled slowly, acknowledging the dual realities. Justice had been served in procedural terms, yet vigilance remained essential. The system could be held accountable only through sustained attention, rigorous documentation, and strategic dialogue. Personal resilience, moral clarity, and meticulous observation were the true instruments of change. He looked out at the city one final time that night. Lights glimmered, indifferent yet interconnected. Marcus understood that reflection, accountability, and systemic vigilance were inseparable, ongoing responsibilities. The work would never fully end, but the foundation for lasting change had been laid, deliberate and unflinching.